Okay, so before I switch to share my screen, are there any questions, any comments? I know you already, and I hope you watch the video recording on Monday, which was the first lecture and the first section on historical legacies. So I want to go very quickly, doing a quick summary in a few minutes, highlighting the main points. But anyway, any comments, any questions? I think I have some people in the waiting room. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I am going to go over the main points, and then I'm going to pick up where I left in the recording. So if at any point you have any comments, any questions, let me know, okay? So let's start by sharing my screen here. Okay, so here you have Latin America. I don't have to repeat what you already saw online, but essentially this is going to be our concentration. In this map, you don't see the Caribbean, but yes, we will be talking about Cuba, perhaps Puerto Rico, certainly Haiti, and other Caribbean places. But anyway, so this was just a brief introduction, trying to spark in your mind important questions. Specifically, one, why is that the US and Canada are so advanced relative to the rest of Latin America when, roughly speaking, these two regions, North America and the rest of Latin America, had similar starting points? And, you know, I gave you some numbers and all that. So we engage into a brief discussion as to, and this is why it's called historical legacies, brief discussion about how was Latin America before colonization. We spoke about the main civilizations there, the Aztec, the Maya, the Chibcha, the Inca, and although before those civilizations, we have had many others, the Olmecs, the Teotihuacans, and many others. But anyway, these were the major ones, particularly at the time the Spanish came. The basic socioeconomic structure, some of the advantages they had, and some of the disadvantages, especially in military terms. And then we start talking about, okay, what the Spanish and the Portuguese to Brazil brought to the New World. So we talk about technology, you know, the gunpowder, the use of the wheel. We talk about animals. You know, think about this. Before the Spanish and the Portuguese were here, Latin American civilizations had no idea about, you know, horses, pigs, sheep, mules, chickens, and others. Or in agriculture, we had no oranges or mandarins. We didn't have cotton. We didn't have coffee, right? So anyway, many people don't know these things, but from an economic perspective, these things matter because, for example, technology, when you have a better technology or a more advanced technology, the possibilities for economic growth, for economic expansion will grow as well. You know, and this includes animals, horses, sheep, all of these things, and new agriculture can help. Anyway, so this is all good in terms of pure economics, right? But then, and this is one of the central points of this particular section, we engage in a brief discussion about the institutional arrangements that the Spanish brought to Latin America. We spoke about scholasticism, you know, the idea that the quest for truth, the advancement of knowledge, was not based on science, was not based on experimentation. No. Everything was based on this deductive method where pretty much the priest had the truth because according to the the ideas of those days, they were inspired by revelation, by insight, and of course because they have the moral and the religious authority. Well, very few people challenge them. But this is important, guys, because think about what that does to economic progress when you are not allowed to do scientific experimentation, to test and test again. No, 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 no. Just go to the priest, talk to them. They will tell you what to do. Anyway, then we talk about mercantilism, which was a very important principle that later became a policy. And I just want to make sure that you understand this, because in the 15, 16, 1700s in Europe, this idea was the dominant all across countries. The basic notion that for a country and for the population of that country to get richer and wealthier, all they have to do was to accumulate gold and silver. Because at the time, remember, there weren't any checking accounts, no debit cards. Every exchange took place in gold and silver. So the idea was, okay, how do we accumulate more gold to get wealthier? Well, sell as much to the rest of the world and buy as least as possible. So don't buy from the rest of the world, sell them. And the basic idea was, in order to sell more, we need to produce more. And if we produce more, that is going to, stimulate investment, employment, output. It's a very, very interesting idea. A very interesting idea. And the notion that international trade is a zero-sum game, that there is a fixed size of the pie. And if you do this, you're going to get a bigger slice and a bigger slice and a bigger slice. This is important now because, as we will discuss probably in 6, 7, 8 weeks, there is a group of people now called the neo-mercantilists that, although these ideas were abandoned 200 years ago, they are, going back in time to read what these guys used to say in terms of building an argument for protection. Just to give you an idea, and I don't want to get into politics right now, but the idea of, buy American. Think about what this does. If we only buy American goods and services, and Japanese only buy goods and services, and everybody in the world is doing the same, everybody suffers, right? So there are some internal contradictions to this ideology or this philosophical approach, because, as we will discover later, international trade is not a zero-sum game. So if we specialize, if we practice international division of labor, the size of the pie can actually grow and grow and grow. And everybody can get a bigger slice, but not at the expense of the others. Everybody can benefit. But anyway, we are going to come back to this later. The Spanish law was transferred intact. So whatever was happening in Spain was happening in the New World. Essentially, in this context, you were the owner of the surface, but not what was underneath. So at the time, of course, oil was not a big deal. Of course, the oil was there, but we didn't have the technology to take it out or to use it. But I'm talking about gold and silver. Land tenure, yes, parcel out by the queen, given to particular people, selected Spanish people. And of course, they employ indigenous populations to work the land in agriculture and mining. Mining was particularly important, guys, because remember, they started discovering that Latin America was rich, very rich in gold and in silver. And of course, the Catholic Church. And again, I don't want to offend anybody, but this is another institutional arrangement that the Spanish brought that produced interesting changes in the paths in terms of economic development and political economy in Latin America, right? Different from the ones that we saw in the US. The Catholic ethics differs significantly from the Protestant ethics. And this can produce very important individual behaviors that collectively can add up to a very different outcomes when you see what's going on. Anyway, and then we start talking about the differences between the Spanish colonizers and the British colonizers. Because this also has an important element to explain why the US is what it is versus Latin America. And again, if you have questions or comments, let me know. And then I think I ended up talking about the most important socio-demographic categories at the time. The Peninsulares, that the Spanish-born, and the reason I want to do this is because we're going to be referring to these groups in a few minutes several times. The Creoles, which are the descendants of Spanish blood, but born in Latin America. And then the indigenous people, obviously the Indian Americans. The mestizos, combination of Spanish and indigenous. The mulattoes, Spanish and Africans. And there are many other combinations. But anyway, this is where we left. So let me pause here. Questions, comments? Anything from what I said now or from what you watched or saw on Monday? It's hard to see hands. So if I don't see you, please unmute yourself. Yes, Eden.
I had a question. So I don't know if this is, I was having a really hard time with the idea that they owned the land, but not what was underneath it. Like, how was that regulated? How was that put into action?
Well, remember the idea is that during those days, there was no private property. It was all common property. So number one, you couldn't sell the land anyway.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So, and the second point is that when the Spanish came, the Queen gave them special rights to Spanish people to take over the lands. Mm-hmm. But the Spanish crown didn't want to give access to these Spanish people in Latin America access to the resources underneath, because the Queen and the King in Spain wanted them, all those resources to be brought back to Spain.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I think in my head, I was picturing kind of like modern day property owning, but then with that on top, and it didn't work. Like, I was like, I didn't think about how it was all public land so much.
Right. That's the key. No private property. You couldn't sell them, nothing. It was just given to you by the Queen and the King in Spain. Yeah. And of course, when you were given this piece of land, you find a lot of communities already established there. Well, they told them, now you work for us. So think about this. Farmers owning the land now are labor in their own land, working for Spanish people that conquered them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, this eventually ended up in slavery, abuse, because not only they were, dispossessed, but they start charging taxes. and of course, the idea, and this is actually part of what is here, the encomienda system. I don't know how many of you have heard this word. Again, there is no translation to English. It's just encomienda, which essentially means to entrust. So in exchange for these labor services, the Indians were supposed to be receiving the benefits of the instruction in the Christian faith and the protection from other invaders. Could be the French, could be the British, or whoever. So the idea was that you cannot even complain, because we let you live in your, not only to being alive, but live in your own place. But in addition to that, we are protecting you. We are giving you work, employment. And guess what? You were in a pagan tradition. Now we are converting you to the real, religion, which is the Catholic faith, right? So think about that. It's like, whoa, okay. Anyway. In addition to that, I think I mentioned on Monday that they also brought very difficult diseases for which the indigenous populations were not ready in terms of the immune system they had. So I'm talking about yellow fever, malaria, and others. And that proved catastrophic for them, because they were, dying, by the thousands. Every week, especially when they were malnourished, They were exploited, no health provision, and of course, exposed to these diseases, they just couldn't survive, right? And of course, here you have a table on the screen where you have a basic idea of how the racial composition was in Spanish America. And they make this distinction between Spanish America and Brazil, again, because Brazil was conquered by Portugal, not Spain. But the differences are very minimal. So the point of this chart is that you can see, let me see if I can, I keep forgetting this. So let me start sharpening my skills here. So let's see. I want to draw some stuff, and I don't know when I'm able to do it. Let's see, right here, 35.5. Actually, I wanted to go to the other one. Let me bear with me, guys. I know I look like, oh, come on, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Anyway, this is the number I want to highlight, 18% in Spanish America, and around the same time in the US and Canada, we're talking about 80%. So think about this. 300 years after the Spanish came, 80% of the population was white. 22% or so was black, because they have to repopulate the labor force with African slaves, and around 60% was Indian American. Now, this is different from the US and Canada, where the majority became white. So in Spain, in Latin America, we're talking about that. Well, this is relevant for the following reason, guys. 20% or so of the population in Latin America were white, and they had an incredible amount of power because there was a huge concentration of land ownership. Now, this is very different from what was happening in the US, right? And we're talking about the same time, 1820s, just right before independence in Latin America. And we're going to talk about this next, right? Something that I forgot to show you, and let me do this now, is that I want to show you a map that is actually related to this, the title of this presentation, right here. So you have access to this map on the handouts section of Canvas. But anyway, I don't know how big is your screen. Let me try to make this even bigger. If I make it too big, the letters start getting blurry. But so the idea of this section is that, I want you to think about the following idea. In general, we think of natural resources as a positive thing, as a blessing, right? I mean, we have, all this corn, all this gold in Mexico, all this, coffee in Colombia, tobacco, Brazilian rubber, cotton, all of these things. But guess what? If you think about the regions rich in natural resources like Africa, Latin America, they happen to be today in the 21st century, the regions with the highest incidence of poverty, particularly Africa. Latin America, as we will discover later, has high levels of poverty, but Latin America enjoys the infamous title of the region with the highest level of income and wealth inequality in the world, even worse than Africa, right? So for many economic development economists, they have questioned the veracity of this assertion that, okay, natural resources equates wealth for everybody, especially when you think about situations like, think about Singapore. I don't know how much you know about Singapore, but roughly speaking, and don't quote me on this, but 2/3 of the land are swamps. Swamps. So no land for agriculture, no mining, none of these resources. And guess what? Singapore enjoys one of the highest income per capita in the world. How do they manage? They have no natural resources, right? So you see the contrast here. So it's very important to think about these things, because obviously places like Latin America, places like Africa were prime targets for colonization and exploitation, right? They didn't go to Singapore. Why? They had nothing there, right? And of course, we need to keep the proportions right. The population is different and many other factors that can play a role, climate, geographical location, and many other things. But in general, it seems very counterintuitive that regions rich in natural resources are now so poor compared to those regions that didn't have any natural resources, and now they are very wealthy.
Yeah.
So think about that.
If you don't mind, I heard an argument about that.
Yes, go ahead.
Saying that if a country has a lot of natural resources, it is in many cases more harmful because they become used to it and become dependent on it. And when the market collapsed, like oil for Venezuela, their entire economy collapsed because they were dependent on the oil.
Right.
It was harmful that Venezuela had so much oil.
Yes. So this, I believe, and you may be thinking about something else, but it sounds like you are talking about something that we are going to discuss in a few minutes, called the Dutch disease, DUTCH. So the idea that when a given country places significant or too much importance on a single commodity that they naturally are endowed with, like oil in Venezuela or gas in the Netherlands, and that's where this Dutch disease comes from, that can be problematic because it's the equivalent of, forgive the expression, to put all your eggs in one basket. You know, you drop the basket, you're done, right? So if especially commodities like oil, gold, corn, well, and more lately, we're commoditizing everything, you know, sheep or any other things. The price of commodities is very unstable over time. Sometimes, for different reasons, the price can go up, and that's where you enjoy a boom, and that's where you have a significant amount of resources, right? But sometimes the price of commodities goes down. Let me give you a very interesting example in Chile. Chile, I believe, is the second largest producer of copper in the world, right? And they were enjoying this position for for a long time, because as you know, the world were expanding and technology was expanding. Think about for conducting electricity, right? And communications, phone and all that. So they were selling copper all over the world. And that's, you know, one of those periods in Chile that they enjoy a significant economic development. But then guess what? Technology worked against them because we invented the fiber optic. And when fiber optic became cheap, the price of oil started tanking because nobody wanted to buy copper anymore. It was expensive and it was not as efficient as fiber optic, right? So you were at the expense of many factors, and you don't want to do that because you may end up like, well, Venezuela is the most current example of a Dutch disease. But yeah, I think that's a very good point. Very good point. Now, let me explain something else that I won't be able to explain this in a recorded session. So how do I do this? Oh, this is what I want. You know what? I know why. Let me do this because I need to connect I have like a whiteboard and I disconnected it. There we go. Because I want to explain something that could be very important, guys. Let me see if I can do this. Can you see my whiteboard there? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Let me do this. You see this dollar sign? You see these symbols on the screen, guys? Okay. So the reason I want to speak about this is because we are going to use these concepts later. And since, this topic came, well, it's important. There is a distinction between what we call hard currency and soft currency. All right, now let me explain this. This is incredibly important and many people don't realize this. All right, so let me give you some intuition first so that you grasp the concept and then I'll explain, all right? So let's suppose that I owe you $1 million. And I say, hey guys, I don't have $1 million right now, but would you take the equivalent of $1 million as payment if I give you Argentinian pesos? What would you say, yes or no? No way, right? Why not? Well, because first of all, Argentinian pesos are not very stable. The government in Argentina is not great. Or if I say, would you take the equivalent in, Bolivares, Venezuelan Bolivares? No way. Or here I have one more student. Or Mexican no. You're going to say no. But if I say instead, okay, I get it. I owe you $1 million, but I don't have $1 million. Would you take the equivalent in, say, well, like I said here, euros? Maybe I would feel more comfortable. What about British pounds? Yeah, I'll take your British pounds. What about Japanese yens? I may take your Japanese yens. And I am trying to do this. And I forgot one. I don't know what's the symbol for the Swiss franc. But the Swiss franc is another so-called hard currency. So hard currencies are typically, 5, maybe 6 now. So you have the US dollar, the Japanese yen, the euro, the British pound, the Swiss franc, and more recently, the yuan or the renminbi, which is the Chinese currency, right? Many countries are now accepting, now that China became a member of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, we are going to talk about that later. Now you can also accept international payments in the Chinese currency, right? But there is only 6 currencies. Now, why is this an advantage to you? Well, think about this. Any of these countries, the US can print dollars, the Europeans can print euros, the same way the British, the Swiss, the Swiss franc, and the Chinese. But Mexico cannot print any of these hard currencies unless, of course, it's illegal currency, right? And of course that happens, but that's a different story. Angola or Bolivia, they cannot print British pounds. If they need to pay debt to international debt, or they need to buy imports, and if they don't have any of these 6 hard currencies, guess what? They cannot buy anything. You understand the importance of this? So all Latin American countries, pretty much any country in the world except this, Europe is not a country, but this region, any of these 6 regions in the world don't have that problem. They can print more if they wanted to. It's not always a good idea, but they could, and buy more from the rest of the world because they know the rest of the world is going to take their currency. Or if they have debt, they can do the same thing. They just print more and pay. But the rest of the world, they cannot do that because the rest of the world, guess what? They only have, let me change color to make it more fun. They only have soft currencies. So the only way the rest of the world, including Latin America, can increase the number of currency, the currencies to pay is by selling or by borrowing. So if, like in the case of Venezuela, the reason they wanted to concentrate on oil is because oil was expensive all at the time, or has been expensive, And by selling oil to the rest of the world, Venezuelan people and the Venezuelan government, they were receiving dollars from the US, from Japan, from Europe. Oh, excellent. And with those, they were buying the things that they couldn't produce. There were, in Venezuela, actually, 90+% of the things they eat, they wear, medicine, food, everything is imports. And that's why now they're in so much troubles, because now that the price of oil, well, it's kind of going back up to $50 per barrel or so, but it is not $100 as it used to be. They are not in a position to generate enough hard currency to pay for what they need to consume. You understand this, the importance of this? And let me pause here, because this is a very important idea that we are going to use later too. So questions, comments about this?
Professor Avalos,
Yes.
is this all due to like inflation and basically like whether they can increase their money supply or decrease it?
Yes, it's related. So one of the reasons, for example, the US or the Europeans or the British don't print and print and print, and they become like the wealthiest countries in the world, is because and I don't want to get too technical, but it's just supply and demand. If they flood the market with dollars, the price of the dollar goes down. The purchasing power of the dollar decreases. And then you may have lots of dollars, but they can buy just very little. The same with the British pound and others. So you don't want to overdo it, because number one, that could increase inflation domestically, and worse, can produce that the rest of the world loses confidence in your government and your monetary authorities. And when that happens, guess what? You may end up moving. Let's say the US is printing and printing and printing dollars, and the inflation in the US goes up, the rest of the world loses confidence in the US government, and guess what? Suddenly, the US dollar may stop being a hard currency, and then they move to the soft currency status.
Oh, so then those countries with the depreciated currencies would then start to use the hard currencies.
Right. Okay. That's okay. I don't know if I understand your question, but if I understand what you're saying. Okay. There is in Latin America, there is one very interesting story, and this is the story of Ecuador. I don't know if anybody here has any connection with Ecuador, but in the year, just close to the year 2000, the Ecuadorian economy got in so much troubles because they start printing so much money that everybody domestically, they, instead of using the sucre, and that was the name of the currency, they start using dollars because the inflation was so high that nobody had confidence in the sucre anymore. They start talking about, no, I'll pay you in dollars. If you pay me dollars, I'll sell you this. Otherwise, I won't. Anyway, eventually, the situation became so dramatic that the Ecuadorian economy became dollarized. What does that mean? If you go to Ecuador today, what is it, January 27, 2021, if you take a plane and you go to Ecuador and you open your wallet in the store, guess what? You don't need sucres. The official currency in Ecuador is dollar, is the US dollar. The same in Panama. So some countries, for different reasons, and this is beyond the scope of the class, although it's related because I'm talking about this is more monetary stuff, decide to give up their own monetary policy, adopt a different currency, a foreign currency like Ecuador or Panama, and in this case, or these cases, dollarize the entire economy, right? The problem is that, now you have no control over the amount of money that circulates in your country because you don't have any authority to print or to not to print dollars. That's the US decision, right? Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It kind of reminds me of the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe,
Yep,
and they started using US dollars in order to stabilize
that's
buying and
right.
selling.
Oh, we are going to get to the hyperinflation times in Latin America. And in fact, I was a kid in Mexico when that happened. So I'll tell you some interesting stories once we get there. So, but again, I really wanted to introduce this concept in a live session because, you know, explaining this in a recorded session, it would be like very difficult.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Anyway, so let me go back to my presentation here. I always have a hard time. Right here. Now I think I'm still sharing the map, right? Can you see? I can tell. Oh, right here. Right. Okay. So no questions, no more comments?
I actually had a quick one.
Yes, go ahead.
I was trying to find the best time to say this because it was on the recorded one. It was about the biological Holocaust.
Yeah.
Just kind of there's a really interesting YouTube video by C.G.P. Gray who talks about how that one focuses on America, but it focuses on how animals have been placed in Europe, and we didn't have any domesticatable animals, and that is actually one of the reasons why that happened. Because the Europeans were already immune to these plagues, but the New World was not, and it actually has to do with how the New World grew. It obviously killed a lot of people because they weren't immune to any of those infections. But it's a 3-part series. He's really good. He's an educator, and he explains it really well.
If you don't mind putting the reference in the chat, I would appreciate that, Anton.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be nice to share with the group for sure. Yeah.
Because it explains both why they were so much more industrialized, the old world was so much more industrialized, and how it brought tons of infections over when they did colonize. Right.
Oh, I see some comments in the chat. Yes, he's amazing. I honestly am not familiar with this reference, but if you put it in the chat, I'll look it up and we can comment on that later, of course. Yeah, but this, again, I think I mentioned in the recording that we speak about the Jews, which is obviously impressive, and the Armenian genocide and perhaps others, but very few people talk about what happened in Latin America. And I think this is something that, well, especially in classes like this, at least should be mentioned. So yeah, thank you for that contribution, Anton. Okay, now let's see, let's go back to share my screen because we now want to talk about the well, what happened with independence, right? So remember, we're taking this historical approach, and right now we reach the part where, okay, 300 years after the Spanish and the Portuguese came, Latin America was ready for revolt, right? Think about this. In 1776, we have the U.S. Independence. In 1789, we had the French Revolution, right? And of course, you probably remember this from your history classes that in 1808, Napoleon invaded Spain. So 300 years of the Spanish crown were crushed by Napoleon because he imposed his brother Jose Bonaparte. If you read some books in Spanish or Castellano, you're going to see that Jose Bonaparte was very well known as Pepe Botella. I don't know if you know that. For those of you that know some Spanish, that's a nickname, Pepe Botella. That was the name of Jose Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon that became king in Spain. Now, another important element was that if you remember, this is precisely the time, not just of the ideas of the French Revolution, you know, égalité, liberté. No, I'm talking about also the times of a major transformation in economics, because this is the time when Adam Smith wrote that very famous book, you know, the Wealth of Nations, and that's where he started talking about, you know what, guys, mercantilists, you have this all wrong. International trade is not a zero-sum game. You know, we need to start expanding the trade routes. We need to start engaging in more collaboration rather than less. Thank you for the CGP. Great, thank you, Anton. We need to start expanding commerce, right? So think about this. By 1822. With the exception of Cuba, and we're going to talk about what happened in Cuba, and this is part of what we have, Guantanamo Bay and other things happening in Cuba right now. With the exception of Cuba, by 1822, every Latin American country had become independent from Spain and Portugal. Right? Of course, in some countries, the war was violent or more violent than others, more people killed. Than others, you know, and some others were a bit more Pacific. But the point is, you know, again, this is not a history class. The point is, get this very important aspect of the title of this section: political change without economic transformation. There is a lot of content in these 5 words. Why? Let me explain what happened. So rather than what some people think, it was not the indigenous populations that led the movement of independence. It was the Creoles. It was the descendants of Spanish people. So it was a Spanish blood people born in Latin America, Creoles. They were the leaders of the movement of independence in Latin America. Because remember, they were resenting, you know, the Spanish people born in Spain being in charge in the land that now Creoles saw as their own because they were born here. And they start mixing with indigenous populations, with the African population. So they start developing this, I don't know, sense of community of their own, independent from the Spaniard sense of community. And of course, they saw the opportunity to cut ties with the crown because, you know, now Napoleon was in charge. So they saw the opportunity to stop sending all these ships with gold and silver. They saw the opportunity to stop paying taxes. And they saw the opportunity to basically shake off the Spanish crown of pressure and the government, and they took it. So it was them, the Creoles, who understood something of the system against they were fighting, right? Here's a very interesting word that the only reason I put it here is because you want to make sure you are careful how to use it, because it's a bit offensive to Spanish. If you say to Spanish gachupin, and that's the pronunciation, gachupin, a Spaniard born in Spain, is a derogatory term, right? So the Creole people took power from the gachupin, but guess what? It was not the Indian masses. They were not ready to understand or prepare to organize a new democratic government following the ideals of the French Revolution or the, you know, soon to be written U.S. Constitution. None of that. It was people with at least some education, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, the independence movement was very successful in terms of, well, breaking the chains from the Spanish crown and the Portuguese crown. But that was not an improvement really for the indigenous populations, because the land concentration remained. the same, 20+% of the white population in 1825 or so, after independence, they were exactly the same people, exactly the same families. The only difference is that instead of paying taxes and following the orders of the crown, now they had the opportunity to govern themselves. But they kept the same institutional arrangements once the Spanish left, once the Portuguese left. Everything was the same, right? So there was this preservation of the political interest, no institutional modernization, no effort to make legal rights more equal, no efforts to start building a more efficient infrastructure for health, for education, for transportation, for communication, nothing. They have absolutely no interest, right? There was only one thing that the Indians and the Creoles agreed upon. They didn't like that the church had so much power because they were owners of a huge amount of land themselves. And that produced, things that we are going to discuss in the next class. But the point I'm trying to make is that we speak about these heroes, and I'm sure some of you with some Latin American background know this. Bolivar and Miranda in Venezuela, Simón Bolívar, San Martín in Argentina, or the priest Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico, which are the heroes of the independence movements. They don't have a very good idea of how to organize a coherent, democratic, well-functioning government. All they wanted to do was to shake off this dominance by the crown. And they did. They won. They kicked out the Spanish people and the Portuguese people, and now they were in charge. But of course, like I said, one thing that they were in agreement with the indigenous populations was the opposition to the large land holdings by the Catholic Church. And of course, they kept exercising significant amount of influence because of the moral authority. This unfortunately was not a good time either to shake off the scholastic approach. Many people, believe it or not, and I'm going to finish with this, many people, believe it or not, in small towns, at least in Mexico, I've been in some places in Latin America, Nicaragua perhaps as well, but in some small towns in Mexico, if there is a dispute that could be, handled by a civil court or the police, many people, instead of going to the authorities, they go to the priest for counseling today in the 21st century. Like, how? Why? Right? How would they know? The priest doesn't know the law, or even if they do, they are not attorneys, right? But even today, 100 years after, 200 years after, many indigenous populations still have a significant amount of trust and confidence in the Catholic authority, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. All I'm saying is that perhaps they are not the most adequate people to solve civil, commercial matters, But anyway, I think this is a good time to stop. I am going to pick up and finish this section on a recorded version on Friday. I think I may need to record this either tonight or tomorrow. So on Friday, we'll be ready. Anyway, questions, comments? It's 2:50 already. Nothing? All right. Well, I guess I will see you live on Monday again. But don't forget to check your recording on Friday, guys. So I hope you have a nice few days. And if you have questions, comments, let me know over email, okay? Or office hours. Remember, nobody show up to office hours this afternoon. So I'm just saying. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.